Okay, I think everyone's in from the waiting room. So hello everyone, thank you for joining us. This is the first of what we hope will be many events for our new women's network at Hertford. And just a few little bits of housekeeping. If you're comfortable having your camera on, then please do. I think it's a nice way of making it feel like we're actually in a room together rather than in a Zoom together. So please don't feel like you have to, but if you would like to have your camera on, then that would be great. But equally, if you're happy being on Zoom just while on mute, just while everyone is talking, that's usually a little bit better to make sure that we can all hear everything that's being said. That would be great. So I'll just really quickly introduce myself. I'm the Director of Development at Hertford, and I am just, I'm quite new. I joined in February, about 3.5 weeks before we went on lockdown. So I have spent most of my time being a virtual member of the Hertford community, but nonetheless committed. So I'm really, really pleased that we've got such a fantastic panel of speakers today. And I'll just really quickly kind of run through what we're planning to do. We are going to hear from each of the speakers individually, then we'll have an opportunity for you all to ask questions. Then we've arranged to put you into breakout rooms. I think you've all signed up to different breakout rooms in advance, depending on what career you're particularly interested in, but we are planning to be quite flexible with that. We'd really just like to encourage discussion and whatever kind of format works for you all particularly, because we really want to make this something that's kind of about you and that really responds to your needs. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Charlotte Hogg. Charlotte is Executive Vice President and Chief Executive of Visa's Europe operations, and has worked in the financial services and banking and management sector for over 25 years. Prior to working at Visa, Charlotte was Chief Operating Officer for the Bank of England from 2013 to 2017, and before that led retail distribution for Santander in the UK and worked at Experian as Managing Director of UK and Irish operations. Charlotte studied history and economics at Hertford, matriculated in 1988, and is also an honorary fellow of Hertford. So Charlotte, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and really a pleasure to join you this afternoon. It's really a treat to be here, and thank you very much for including me. I guess I wanted just to start by saying, I think when you have some of these discussions, particularly, it's easy to listen to other people's careers and think, gosh, that sounds very planned and very organized and slightly intimidating in a way. And so I wanted to start by saying, you'll be entering the workforce more qualified and more skilled than any of us ever did, if you don't mind me speaking for others as well. And you need to retain your belief in that, because in a way, careers are hugely a matter of luck. And you know, that great goddess of fortune that's emblazoned on all the floors of the Bank of England is both two-sided, you know, good luck and bad luck. And both things will happen in the course of your career. And I don't lay any pretense to thinking any otherwise. I think the other thing is, in talking about this, the option of careers that you have open to you are so different than what we had when we started. And so anything you see in our path might be interesting, but equally, I think there's some really interesting options that you may not be thinking about, maybe you are, that will open up very different sets of careers and perhaps even more interesting ones. So, you know, if I was in your shoes now, I'd be thinking about careers in cybersecurity, for example, or careers in data science, not necessarily the management consulting route and the public sector route that I went through. So just to set that as context, you're enormously talented. There are an incredible range of options, and I know it's really hard right now. The other thing I just wanted to encourage you to think about is, and it took me a very long time to learn this, is really do try and understand what your motivations are and what you like to do, and be truly honest with yourself, because it's very easy for people to say this is the right career to go to, or this is the career that we're all doing, and you're going to succeed better if you're able to pick choices that really appeal to you. And that might be a public service mentality and the sense of purpose that comes with that. It might be that you want smaller organizations rather than big organizations, younger organizations versus older ones. It might be that what really matters to you is the people around you. But if you can be honest with yourself about what really matters to you, then you will be much more effective in whatever you choose to do and whatever you look to do. And you know, that also communicates much better when you're in an interview. I think the other thing is, you know, not everything goes right in your career. You know, I've had some pretty public things that have not gone right, and they are usually the most developmental, and those things will happen, and being able to bounce and finding a way to bounce is important, and figuring out who you want to surround yourself with that help you to do that is really important. But don't expect any kind of straight line, and try and welcome the good stuff as well, the bad stuff as well as the good stuff. The other thing to think about now, and I think in the future, is how do you surround yourself with people from whom you can ask advice? You know, a lot of debate goes on in the workplace about mentorship, but what in the essence it is, I think, is giving people opportunities to help you. And you'd be surprised, because most people who are great hirers of talent want to help, because they're getting a gift from you in terms of getting to know you better, understanding what you might do. And for all of us that are lucky enough to be hiring people quite frequently, having a kind of mental Rolodex of, it's a very old-fashioned word, a mental list of people and what they might want to do and where they might want to go in the future really helps build organizations, which is what we all try and do when we are lucky enough to be in the position that I'm in. So ask for help and regard it as conferring a gift rather than asking for a favor. And you will find that if you can build that set of people around you, then every experience that you start to hit, you have a set of people who can go to, and you can say, how the heck do I do this? I mean, I remember the first time I had to do a union negotiation, probably, well over 14 years ago now. I hadn't done it before, and having people to go to understand how to work through that was really helpful. The other thing is, I actually truly believe the one thing that's really good in the workforce today is I actually truly believe you can be more yourself than we ever were. You know, my mother was a career woman the whole way through, and I remember her telling me way then that she was in a hiring conversation, she was a journalist for a long time, with a bunch of men who said something like in the conversation, I've never been able to hire an unattractive woman. I was like, oh my God, you know, no one would say that now. And she, good for my mother, she came right back and said, you know, same thing, very hard to hire an unattractive male. But that's decades ago. You know, there was still, when I started, a very different, you know, perception of how women should be in the workforce. And I think in the end, that's diminished to a great degree, and it's so much easier to be yourself, and therefore you are, again, much more effective than you would be in any circumstance. And that is a better place to be than we've ever been, I think. So that's, I think, positive. Be yourself. You can be now, and you will make you more effective if you can do that. And anyone who tells you you have to be a certain way or dress a certain way or behave in a certain way, you can largely ignore them at this point. And then my just last thought, which has been, is I don't think any form of career is worth a real sacrifice of family and friends. You know, there are definitely times when one works harder, but I think the way that you, in the end, do survive the bumps that happen is because you've continued to care about family and friends and spend enough time on them. So again, everything one does from the beginning to make sure that you do create spaces that mean that you are, you know, the family member that you want to be, the friend you want to be, as well as thinking about your career, are so important, and it's an investment worth making from the beginning, because work in the end doesn't, can be endless. And if you don't learn how to establish those kind of controls, it's very hard to build them later. So that was just a thought of kind of things I've learned. It took me a long time to learn, and hopefully will generate a discussion as we get into it, and probably more interesting than talking through all the nuts and bolts of what I did first, second, and third. So let me hand over to the others, please.
Great, thank you so much, Charlotte. I really love the idea of when you ask for a mentor, you're kind of conferring a gift on them. I love that idea. So that's a really good way of thinking about it. So now I'm going to introduce Carol Sennett. Carol is an award-winning television executive. As BBC commissioning editor, Carol was responsible for the acquisition of factual programmes globally, shaped media policy at the European Commission, and played a strategic role in the launch of 3 BBC channels. Over her 35-year career, she's won 2 international Emmys and worked with household names, including David Attenborough, Jonathan Dimbleby, and Judi Dench. Carol matriculated in 1982 and read history at Hertford. Carol, over to you.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for that lovely introduction, Frances. And may I say how lovely it is for me to see all these wonderful, poised young women, albeit in Zoom boxes, looking at me. And I would just like to say, reiterate what Charlotte said. Go girls, go, because you have in Hertford the most extraordinary education. Make the most of it. Don't ever forget that you're all jolly good. And I would like to say from my own standpoint, which in very many fascinating ways, actually, even though it's a completely different field, overlaps with a lot of what Charlotte said, that Hertford College, like Charlotte's area, has a strong track record in television. You've got people like me behind the camera. We've got Anthony Geffen, who is a multi-BAFTA award-winning producer. In front of the camera, we've got Fiona Bruce. We've got Natasha Kopinski. And I'm saying that to you, ladies, because you are one of us. Should you choose to, should media motivate you, don't give up. That's the Mercado shop. If you don't give up because everybody tells you it's hard to get into. I'm about to give you some tips to actually overcome that. And again, just expanding on one of Charlotte's points about her mother, an attitude towards men. I'd like to start by telling you a little story. It was on my first day at the BBC in 1986. And there were 3 graduate trainees in a row, 2 men and myself. And the managing director at the time introduced us to the various other editors. He said, "Good morning, everybody. May you like to meet Nick Robinson." It wasn't the real Nick Robinson. "Robert Winston, and the lovely Carol." I thought, hang on a minute. Nice to say I'm lovely, but please will you use my second name? And what is frightening is that in our industry now, although I would honestly say there's very little real bias, in fact, it's almost gone the other way, subliminal bias will always be there. And there's something else I learned on that day as well, which was quick as a flash. The female editor of the arts show, Meridian, stood up and said, "Oh, you must be Carol Sennett. How lovely to meet you." And I learned a lesson that day. I learned a lesson, and it is this, that once you transcend from the academic world to the workplace, ostensibly everybody's on an even field, but there are a lot of what we call unconscious biased attitudes towards women. So whenever you get the chance, again, I'm reiterating something that Charlotte said, whenever you get the chance to help another woman in that sort of scenario, do it. And I'd thank the Development Committee Beyond Measure for what it's doing here, for setting up this sort of network so we can discuss these issues in a more sort of intimate environment. Anyway, moving on, I'm just going to give you a little flavour of my television career before I launch into a few points that may be helpful. I've had many roles in television. My first was actually as a production trainee in the World Service, which in those days you were sent from department to department and learned little things and spent vast amounts of time photocopying and making tea. I then progressed to be a researcher on a history series called Time Watch, where my history degree came in very, very useful. I won't take you through step by step, but became a commissioning editor, which is probably one of my favourite roles because it involved working with so many different broadcasters, in some areas up to 36 different broadcasters, working out together what programmes we would make, who would make them, and overseeing them for transmission. And so that was very much a strategic partnership role. Now, how did I get there? I would like to reiterate exactly what Charlotte said, which is that how I got there probably isn't very helpful to many of you now, because the actual post-production training scheme run by the BBC doesn't exist in that way anymore. But what does exist is the most enormous number of schemes that follow strategic goals. So there'll be engineering schemes, there'll be journalism schemes. There's actually a lot of schemes that encourage diversity. The industry at the moment, the focus is very much on ethnic diversity rather than the male-female balance. But there you go, there is a lot out there. If you wish to consider basic training before you enter the job market, you can go to the National Film Television School, Cardiff, Salford, Bournemouth. All those places do very good media courses. But again, I'd like to reiterate the point. If you turn on your Sky television of an evening, you'll see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of programmes all listed. And naturally, you'll just think, oh, well, all these people have had a jolly nice time making programmes, going out filming. Well, actually, there are enormous amount of jobs related to that. Some poor sap has had to fill out a compliance form, which goes on for 20 to 25 pages for every programme. Someone's had to edit it together. Someone's had to look at the strategic mix of that evening. So when you think media, don't just think on-camera media. You can morph into that later in your career, but there are a huge number of ways of getting in. Consider even the Ofcom graduate training scheme. That's really great in giving you the basis of media. So think out of the box, ladies. The second thing I would say that is very important in media, indeed in all industries, is build your network. You can start building it now with the people you're meeting today. I was a president of the Broadcasting Society, the Media Society. Do all of that. And let me give you another woman tip here. There's something I call the handbag conundrum. And what that is whenever you go to a cocktail party or one of these media events where everybody's meeting up, you will see that the men have a very surreptitious move. And what that is that they combine the handshake with passing the business card over. The action of passing that business card over is saying more than the business card. It's saying, I'm interested in you. I'd like to keep in touch. You wouldn't believe the number of women that don't bother because they've got to reach down to their handbag and it's all a bit of a kerfuffle. Don't do that. Just have one in your other hand. Little tip from me. Makes a huge difference, particularly in media, where it really is about who you know. 70% of jobs aren't advertised, so always remember that. The second thing may sound obvious, is strategic hard work. but the emphasis is on the strategic. And this is the other big difference, I would say, between the academic environment and the business environment. Now, ladies of all your caliber, having got into Hertford, you will all be very hard workers anyway. So of course, none of you would ever do a bad job. By strategic hard work, what I'm referring to is wherever you are, act as if you're on the next level up at every possible opportunity. And I'll give you an example from my own career. One of my attachments was in Global Report, which was based at the Elstree Studios. And down the corridor was Time Watch. And in Global Report, I was a general assistant, just doing admin basically. And then after I'd finished my work, at lunchtimes and everywhere else, I would wander up the corridor to Time Watch and say to the editor of Time Watch, is there, do you need any extra research work or strategic work done? I'd just be very interested to have a go. I ended up doing that, thought it had come to nothing. 6 weeks later, guess what? A research position comes up in Time Watch. It's needed quickly, as these things often are. Ah, I know someone that can do research. Carol, come in, Carol. There I was. And in the business world, that happens all the time, not in just media. So please remember that, ladies, strategic hard work. So there we are. Look out of the box if you want to go into media. Don't be frightened off by the 3 people who managed to get into some training scheme from 3 million applicants. There's lots and lots of other ways. I'd personally be happy to advise anybody on those. Secondly, build your network at every possible opportunity. And thirdly, strategic hard work. And I'd like to end where I began, with a story. And I've met many, many fine women in my industry. And one of the women that I was most privileged to work with on an 8-part series about the First World War was Judi Dench. And there was I was terribly nervous. I've got to somehow direct the great Judi Dench. She came into the recording studio equally nervous, saying, Carol, I'm so sorry, I'm not sure I've finished your reading list. She put so much work into that role to get it just right. And that is something that I have seen time and time again in all these great names I've worked with. David Attenborough, I've met Neil Armstrong, who walked on the moon. I've met these fantastic people, but almost without exception, they work like dogs. And so that's also something to remember. Also something to remember, a lot of them get nervous like you and I do. Judi Dench is almost sick with nerves before she goes on, and she overcomes it. Fear the fear and do it anyway. And just to close, if you ever get a comment like I did early on my career, may I remind you of something that Judi Dench did tell me. I asked her, what was your favourite role you've ever played? I was expecting, Cleopatra and Antony Cleopatra, or perhaps Juliet in Romeo and Juliet. She said, no, Carol, M. I said, M? She said, yes. And she said, you know what, Carol? If any man ever puts you down, remember my words. Mr. Bond, you are a sexist, misogynist dinosaur. And so I will end as I began, with a story. Come and join us, ladies, in the media. Don't let anything put you off. Lots and lots of ways. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some thoughts with you today.
Thank you so much, Carol. That was really interesting. I personally could listen to you talk about Judi Dench all day. Anyone, any questions about Judi Dench, please pop them in the chat, or any questions that you have about what Carol and Charlotte have said, either have a think and feel free to ask them in the Q&A or pop them in the chat. So now I'm going to introduce Paula Clark. Paula is a debt capital markets lawyer. and mainly works as a consultant now, currently works as a consultant now for Citigroup, where she advises on capital markets regulation and Citi's Brexit planning, which must be a never-ending task, which keeps getting extended and extended, as well as general debt capital markets transactional work. Which means bonds to the uninitiated. And I still don't quite understand what that means, Paula. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about what you do. Paula trained at Clifford Chance and worked at various law firms before becoming a self-employed legal consultant in 2014 and working in various investment banks. Paula matriculated in 1992 and read jurisprudence.
Thanks. I feel like I have a hard act to follow, but I'll do my best. I had a very traditional career in a way, in the sense that I was a Swati child, probably like many of you, and everyone assumed that as a Swati child I'd probably become a lawyer, and so I did, because I obviously suffer from a tremendous lack of imagination. But when I started looking for training contracts, again, you have a huge advantage being at Oxford because, well, maybe not in times of COVID, but the whole recruitment process comes to you for the conventional jobs like law. And I went to a law fair and walked around and was introduced to lots of people, and every law firm sent some old guy and a blonde from HR, and you go around and you meet them, and they all look really boring, and I couldn't see myself in any of these people. And then I went to the stand at Clifford Chance, and it was manned by two young women who were, one was a trainee and one was a recently qualified lawyer. They were wearing trousers, which in 1994 was quite a daring fashion choice for women. Fortunately, we've moved a long way since then. And so I applied and got a job there almost without realizing what a great big law firm it was, until I did a summer placement there. And I certainly had no idea before I started doing debt capital markets that was even really a thing. I certainly didn't know what it was. So one thing I would say is keep an open mind. You never know what you might end up doing. I'm sure you have access to loads more information, or information that's much more readily available than it was pre-internet, when most of us were starting our careers. But I ended up almost, Clifford Chance is a big finance firm, and that's what I did. There was the one strategic decision I made was I thought, well, I'm going to qualify it into finance because that's what this firm is strongest at, and that's going to give me the best career prospects. I left after 5 years post qualification and went to a US firm where I had a horrible experience with a boss who was having some kind of breakdown, and I did end up leaving after a year. I didn't want to leave because we're working on a really interesting transaction. But eventually, when you're working with someone who's got mental health problems, it starts to affect your own mental health. I felt sorry for him for a while, but and I only mentioned that. I then left and went to another firm. I only mentioned that because while I was working there, I made the contact that led to the job that I have now. So in many ways, even though it wasn't a great experience, it wasn't a great time in my life, I made a great contact with one of my clients who's since given me a job. So going back to what Carol said, build your network, because you never know who's going to give you a job that you really enjoy. I then I went to a firm called Ashurst, where I was really badly impacted by the financial crisis. And to go back to what someone else is saying, it's luck. Where you are in your career and how you progress, a lot of it is luck. The financial crisis was kind of bad luck for me because that was probably around the time when I wanted to become a partner. And it was really challenging in the area I was in. And after being passed over for several years, I eventually quit in a half and went traveling for 6 months just to sort of get my head straight. And I had a fantastic time. I indulged. I'm very into wildlife photography. I went to all these weird and wonderful places and took photos, had a great time. And when I got back, I thought, oh, I'll just maybe do a bit of contract work and see how it goes while I figure out what I'm going to do next. 5 years later, 6 years later, that's still what I'm doing. And I got my current job after bumping into a contact on a train. We got chatting. He asked what I was doing and offered me a job. So I would say, you know, you can plan your career, but things never quite follow the plan. You never know what you're going to end up enjoying. Don't live in fear. Don't stick in a bad job just because you think, well, I've invested so much in it, I've got to keep going. Don't put too much weight on other people's expectations of what you should be doing. Don't compare yourself to other people, because as long as you're happy, you're enjoying what you do. I know, talking to my friends from Hertford, that everybody, you know, that Natasha Kaplinsky, for example, was in my year, and everybody looks at her. She's on the telly. She's gorgeous. She seems to have this charmed life, but I'm sure everyone looks at everybody else and thinks their life is going so much better than mine. Their career is better than mine. As long as you're happy and enjoying what you do, you should never compare yourself to anyone else. I think that's all from me.
Okay, thank you, Paula. It's such a good message to end on, and I think it's something that everybody feels. I certainly am constantly comparing myself to other people. I'm going to try not to. I'm going to follow your advice. So thank you so much, Paula. Now I'm introducing Pip Wilson. So Pip matriculated just after Paula in 1993 and read maths. She is a 2-times entrepreneur who co-founded Bluefin Solutions in 2002. It's now a global consultancy firm and was sold in 2015. And Pip is now the co-founder and CEO of Amicable, which is an innovative business looking to change the way that people divorce, which sounds like quite an interesting field to be working in. And so I'd love to hear a bit more about that. Pip is also deputy chair of the RSA and a board trustee for the Girls Network. She's passionate about empowering women in tech, creating connections and disrupting traditional business models, and regularly invests in female-founded businesses. So Pip, over to you.
Thank you very much, Frances. Yeah, thank you for having me today with such a distinguished kind of fellow panelists. I'm very pleased to kind of see the little Zoom boxes of everybody who's joined, and keen that you are kind of pleased that you are keen to hear from the likes of us, and hopefully we can give you some information that will be, I guess, useful. You've all had some brilliant tips by the other panelists so far, and so I guess I was going to focus a bit more on what I've learned from kind of running my own business. And I did start with a fairly traditional Oxford career path, in that I joined what was then Anderson Consulting, but it's now Accenture, straight from university. And had a brilliant time, met some great people, it was really good fun. But whether it was by luck or what, the department that I ended up being in was starting from 3 or 4 of us, and we grew it to a team of 60. And I realized that was the bit that I absolutely loved, was the fact that we had created something. And therefore, when an opportunity came up to join a much smaller organisation and feel that I could influence a bit more, rather than being in an organisation with 20,000 people globally or whatever it was then, that immediately kind of appealed. And so I jumped at the first opportunity, and I think I kind of continued to do that as things have gone on. And sometimes I find that you never know what's going to happen. You never know which way decisions are going to turn out. But one of the things that I think is always really important is making those decisions and having the kind of belief in yourself that you will be you will make the best of those decisions, and you'll give it a go. And I try to never look back or regret what has happened in the past, because at the time those decisions felt like the right way forward. And a lot of people are paralyzed by effectively the fear of the unknown. And ultimately, unless you try something, it's very difficult to know what the outcome might have been. There's very few things, I think, in your working life that you will not learn from. And even, I mean, Paula mentioned her bad kind of company experience, but actually you learn almost as much, if not more, from the things that were more difficult and didn't quite go the way you wanted to plan. So actually, anyone I know who started their own company and it's not worked out has also learned a huge amount from that experience. So if you've got an idea or you've got an entrepreneurial kind of thing you want to try, then give it a go, because you never know what might happen. So that is kind of, I guess, my first thing is that try those opportunities. The other thing I think that is really interesting for you all is that the world of work, I believe, is going to change more over the next year or so than it has done probably in the last 20 years, certainly since the kind of advent of technology, as being something that everybody has kind of on a personal basis. There was already a shift to a bit more flexibility and a bit more working from home, but it was happening so slowly. And I think it's something that's incredibly relevant for women in particular, because we have historically done the bulk of childcare and family commitments. Now, what's happened this year with COVID has massively accelerated a trend that was happening anyway, by introducing flexibility. And so many senior business people who have said, oh, well, can't have everyone working from home, how will that work, etc., have had that totally kind of thrown almost in their face, because everybody's been forced to. Businesses have been run in a different way from ever previously, and that will have knock-on effects for decades to come. And for you all guys, because it opens up the opportunity of working in a different place, working in a different way, being totally flexible by hours, doing more than one job earlier on in your career, rather than that being something that only happens when you get to kind of a senior level and you're doing a portfolio manager. So I think it's a really, really interesting time to be starting your career, because you've got some fantastic opportunities open to you. I think the final thing I just wanted to touch on is, to me, I realised the most motivating factor ever is continuing to learn. And two people have said this to me over the last week, that every day is a school day, and that carries on throughout your career. And actually, one of my biggest kind of eye-opening moments was in my previous business, which we set up in 2002. I was one of 4 co-founders and spent 12 years initially growing that. And we got to the point where we had about 250 people globally, and we were turning over kind of a very nice revenue figures, etc. And I was looking around thinking, I'm not enjoying this anymore. Why is this? And realised that actually I was bored. I got to the point where we were having the same problems, and we'd hit a kind of stall where we couldn't grow it ourselves, and we weren't doing anything different. And we'd had 2 or 3 years, and it combined with kind of financial crash times and various points where it just wasn't interesting, and therefore we had to do something different. And that's quite an eye-opener when it's your own business as well, because it's like, actually, no, we really have to do something. And we ended up kind of going through various different options, but did end up selling the business. And I exited at the point of the sale, and then kind of went on to do something totally different. But that you need, it's the learning that makes things interesting, and continuing to look for new challenges and new ways of doing things, or new things that can make the biggest difference. So don't ever be afraid, whatever the position, to go, like, what's next? What is the challenge that's going to keep me interested? Because if you are interested in learning, you will enjoy it much more, and you'll be more successful, and it will be rewarding. We all have the choice as to where we spend our time, and I think Charlotte said right at the start, work shouldn't be everything. Family and friends are absolutely important, and therefore make sure your work is enjoyable, because all the time you're spending at work is time you're not doing other things. So prioritize everything.
Great, thank you, Pip. That was really interesting, and I love the idea of just like always looking for something to learn from in your job, and maybe when you get to the point when there's not much more to learn, then it's time to start thinking of something else. So now I'm going to introduce our last speaker, Nicola. So Nicola is a portfolio non-executive director, and is currently on the boards of several companies which are must be going through really, really interesting times at the moment with COVID-19. So she's on the board of the Anchor Hanover Group, which is the UK's largest provider of housing and care for older people. CS Healthcare, which is a private medical insurer, and Wings Travel, a global corporate travel business. And I believe one more, but Nicola, I can't remember if that's public yet, so I might leave that up to you to announce when you speak. And after reading PPE at Hertford and completing an MBA at INSEAD, Nicola spent 20 years as a strategy consultant and was a partner at Monitor Company, which is now Deloitte, where she led strategy projects for leading consumer brands. Nicola also spent a number of years at De La Rue PLC, which is a banknote printer, which just sounds extremely interesting, as Group Director of Strategy. Nicola was at Hertford in 1987, and as I mentioned, read PPE.
Thank you, Frances. Well, alongside everybody else, let me say what a delight it is to be here, and how great it is. So my compliments to the development team at Hertford for coordinating this event, and hopefully many more in the future. I think it's a great place to be and a great thing to do. So well done everybody for turning up. So much has already been said, which I wholeheartedly agree with. I suppose I'll just add a couple of points of my own, and then we open up. So my life is quite different to how I imagined it would be when I left Hertford. I left Hertford, I was ambitious, I was hungry, I wanted to be a strategy consultant, I wanted to make money, I wanted to be promoted. I really was quite fueled, and gradually over time I grew up, and I learned that there's a thing called work-life balance. And work-life balance, actually, it probably doesn't occur in a month or even in a year, but it does occur over the course of the decades of your life. And I think one of the things that all of us have talked about today is the importance of finding that balance and making sure you have time for family and friends. I was travelling the world selling banknotes as Director of Strategy for De La Rue when I had my fourth child. And I just fell over. I was exhausted. And I eventually realised I just couldn't carry on that way. And one of the wonderful things that women have today, more than ever, is choice. So you have the choice to work, you have the choice to thrive, you have the choice to learn. You also have the choice not to a degree, or the choice to rebalance your life and do organize things differently. So back in 2008 it was when I left De La Rue, I actually thought I'd never work again. I thought I'd just had enough. And I'm thrilled to say that I was wrong. This work-life balance eventually fell back into place. I love looking after my 4 children and have spent the best part of the last 20 years doing just that. But I found a way of combining a really rewarding, interesting, part-time set of roles with being a mother. So as Frances said, I'm on the board of Anchor Hanover. Hugely proud to be involved in that business. It's the size of a FTSE 250 business, but it's a charity. And we're the highest performing group of care homes. We had the lowest incidence of COVID, and well, we still do, touch wood. But we're doing a marvellous job in looking after our residents. We're also the biggest provider of social housing for older people in the UK. It's a great business to be part of. I've just joined the board of Ofwat, the UK water regulator. An absolute privilege to be part of that organisation, which clearly has a huge role to play in the resilience and quality of our water supply. I'm on the board of a medical insurance business, and I chair the remuneration committee there, which is an interesting role. And I'm on the board of a global travel business, and frankly, to have stayed afloat over the last few months has been challenging, and I'm very proud of the team that we it looks like we'll be here to stay. So it's a really different it's a different working experience. Each role takes maybe 2 days a month. So on average, I'm working 8 days a month, and when I'm not doing that, I'm doing things that give me joy. I look after my children, I run with my neighbour. I qualified as an accountant this year. So the idea that education is a thing that starts and stops and then you have a career, that's not true. There's a continuous journey to life. And when COVID hit, and we clearly all had to change the way we spent our time, I realised I'd have more time at home than normal, or certainly more time at my desk. And I signed up for a CFO program that in a few weeks' time I'll have some more letters after my name, which makes me chuckle. And I've just joined the school that my children are at as a governor. So there's a constant evolution of things. So what does that all mean? What would I like to leave you with? Think about work-life balance over a long period of time. From my own experience, it was worth really putting in the time early on, because it meant by the time I stopped, having had my children, I was sufficiently senior that it was possible to move in and out of board roles the way that I now do. Embrace what gives you a sense of joy. You've only got one life. We have to live it well. I had 2 really good pieces of advice from different mentors. One was from a gentleman who said, pick the people you work with, make sure you're doing things that you really enjoy, and insofar as it matters, and frankly, usually it does matter to everyone a bit, make sure you're making some money. That was one set of criteria. The other was from Helen Alexander, who obviously was a wonderful woman, a member of Hertford College, chief executive of The Economist, part of the whole move to get more women on boards. She said, and I was lucky enough to work for her at The Economist and early on in my career, she said, Nicola, be clear about what you want. Only you know what you want, but be clear about it, because if others know, in general, they will try and help you achieve it. So ladies, be clear, enjoy what you do, and remember that even at the age of 51, you can still be getting new qualifications and getting new jobs. That's probably what I've got to say.
Great, thank you so much, Nicola. I think that's such an interesting point about being clear about what you want to achieve, because I think so many times there's that old joke of like, oh, why haven't I won the lottery? Well, have you bought a ticket? And I think when when you're able to say, actually, I really want to achieve X, Y, Z, then you are much more likely to find the people that you want to achieve it, that will help you achieve it. I have a question to kind of kick off the Q&A. So I think there's a lot of myths around women in the workplace, oh, you can't go into XYZ profession because they're very male dominated and you'll end up just kind of making the tea for everybody. I just wondered to really anyone in the panel, but perhaps we could start with Charlotte, because I know you've been, having gone first, you've been silent for quite a long time. What do you think are the biggest myths? Like, what myth would you like to dismantle for our group here today?
So I think the biggest one, which others have talked about, is that other women won't help you. I think it's one of those myths that comes up quite a lot, and quite often men say it, is that women are horrible to other women. That has not been my experience. It's certainly not the experience I try and give to others. And I think from what Carol particularly said, it's not the case. I think in the environment we live in today, even in financial services, which is still quite male oriented, women are there and can be good role models, good sources of advice, and typically choose to do that.
Thank you. Does anyone else from the panel have anything to add to that question? Okay, I'll move on in that case. So there's a question from the chat. So thank you all for sharing your thoughts, which I think we all would echo. Some of you mentioned times when you have felt disadvantaged being a woman in your profession. Would you say that there are actually benefits of being a woman in a male-dominated environment? And I don't know if anyone would like to start on that. Carol, brilliant, thank you.
Yes, I would like to say something on that, because it is amazingly still the case that particularly in the boardroom, there's less of you. Therefore, you stand out more. And because of that, the irony is that, contrary to popular belief, I found that when a woman says something, it can actually have more, not less impact, provided they use the same sort of terminology that men do. There's a lot of male catchphrases I've noticed on boards. One of them repeatedly is, let's stand back and look at this from a strategic perspective, they say. It's actually meaningless. They're not particularly standing back, but the fact they've said that statement gives it gravitas. So what I would say is, if you're on a woman on a board, there's no need to be terribly masculine. I think it was, someone referred earlier to trouser suits, and I actually think that's all outdated now. I don't think there's anything wrong with wearing, on a summer's day, a smart summer dress to the boardroom. I think the days are gone that we all have to look like men. But the irony is you can have more gravitas, as long as what you don't do is fall into the trap of using what a lot of women, particularly from girls' schools, I may say, have been brought up to do, which is to preempt your statement by saying something like, oh, sorry for interrupting, or I thought of this, or could I just throw that in there? A lot is in how you speak. And the other thing I've noticed in boards, particularly when women take command, and they really can take command very quickly, people do really listen to them, is if they speak more slowly. Men, when they're saying something important, slow right down. They are not afraid of silence. women are. I've never worked out why that is. Perhaps it's because we're designed to have babies and stop them crying. I don't know. But I think there can be an advantage by being a minority. And at the moment, we are in fact on what I would call a counter wave. May not be in other industries, but in my industry in particular, for example, our old another Hertford lady, Fiona Bruce, leads Question Time. There is almost now a feel after the gender pay gap fiasco that women are almost given more opportunities. So what I'd say to everybody is take advantage of those opportunities. Don't be masculine about it. But remember, you might just have that little bit of advantage there, because people remember what you say because you're just a little bit different. So try and make it a positive thing. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Carol. I'm not sure if any of the other panelists have anything to add. Nimali, I noticed you had your hand up, so I'll come to you next. But does anyone have? Oh, Charlotte.
I'd like to add to that, because I think there's a huge advantage of being a woman, particularly when you're in, over time, management and leadership roles. And the reason I say that is because people perform best when the person who is managing them adapts their style to get the best out of them. And by definition, as a woman, you have a much, much wider spectrum you can use. So you can go everything from the people who work best when you coax them into doing something, to those where you say, no, I need you to do it now. So this ability to adapt and have by still being true to yourself, but have a much wider range of styles to bring the best out of others is, I think, just a huge advantage, because typically men don't play the full spectrum and women can. And so I think that's probably adding to Carol's point a little bit, but I think for now and in the future, because there is this positivity towards women leaning into being able to use a range of different styles when they're needed is a huge advantage.
Great point. Thank you, Charlotte. Anybody else like to add anything? Or?
Yeah, well, I'd like to echo what Carol said. One of the projects I've been working on is how we're planning for Brexit at City. And when I go to those meetings, I'm the only woman in those meetings, but it does mean that everyone knows who I am, because it's pretty obvious when you look through the list of attendees that Paula is a woman, and it's raised my profile very quickly at the bank. So sometimes being a minority does help get you noticed.
That's a really great point. Thank you. Nimali, I think you had your hand up just now. Would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you to all of the panelists, also to you, Frances, for organizing this fantastic event. It's such a lovely continuation of the kind of very supportive and welcoming environment that I also experienced at Hertford. So it's really been a joy. I had a question that actually sort of attaches quite nicely to the last comment that Charlotte made, which was it relates to essentially that, you know, the style of management and what is effective management, team management in particular, to kind of has evolved quite a lot, I think, over the last sort of 10, 15 years into a more kind of supportive, collaborative. There's a general consensus that happy teams get better results. But I've been kind of quite astounded and mostly disappointed by the leadership actually that I've encountered in my experience. So mostly with, it's kind of this, I think perhaps a generational difference with kind of much older leadership that are just kind of set in their ways, and they came up in different times and they just have a different set of values. But even in the job that I'm in right now, the other project manager that I work with, that manages the team with me, he's only 10 years older than me, and his lack of empathy and lack of reflection in the way that he communicates and yeah, the way that he manages the team is just astounding to me. And I'm really unsure how to navigate that, because there's just a certain point at which you have to find a way to work together with these things. But I just wondered basically if you had any advice for kind of navigating through the working with senior management, working with leadership that kind of hold on to these old ideas of what that actually means.
That's a really great question. And I wonder if we could start with Pip and Nicola, if you have anything particular to add to that, to respond.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really difficult position to be in, especially when you're at the start of your career, and it's quite hard, I guess, to give advice on a specific issue when it is kind of without knowing the full details. But I think you're absolutely right that there is still an old-fashioned way of managing, and often the person who's being managed, the person who might only be 10 years further in their career, may not have ever been managed by anybody themselves in a particularly good way. So it's learned behaviour that has gone down. And one of the things that I've tended to find is that actually a lot of people who might come across as being almost sounding quite forceful to begin with, actually are actually very conflict avoidant. They don't want the difficult conversation. And that's where the lack of empathy is coming from, is that they are nervous about being direct and therefore will address it by sidestepping the issue or not being clear or just not giving any feedback at all. And it's all you can do is be as authentic as possible and be as kind of direct as possible, and ask questions. If you can get some of that feedback in a way that doesn't make the other person feel that they are being pressured. And it might sound wrong, but ultimately we are all managing people all of the time, whether we're managing the people we're reporting to or back. So you can kind of say, look, is there a different way that you'd like me to do this? Or can I have a bit more guidance on how to do this? And try and don't avoid the conflict yourself. Try and ask the questions to get the information that might move the dialogue forward. If it's a lack of communication, and I think that's probably my kind of general advice. More specific than that, I need to understand a bit more about exactly what was happening. But do you think it's that kind of behaviour that is actually what you're seeing?
Yeah, perhaps. I do think, because I work in academia, so I think a general issue with academia is that a lot of people get leadership roles and nobody's given any kind of development or education for how to actually be an effective leader, which kind of results in these kind of tensions, I think, a lot of the time. I do think that in our case, it is that kind of spectrum that Charlotte was talking about, where I'm more of a person, to a project manager. I see my role as working for the team and enabling them as my job. I kind of work for them, is the way I see it. Whereas the other manager sees it, I think, the other way around, and has a very kind of, I don't know, autocratic approach to management. And he's just, and he doesn't listen really, and it's just all of these like stereotypical kind of old school tendencies, and it's just really difficult to navigate, because the reason it frustrates me is because I'm also responsible for the outcomes of the project, like he is, and I see him demotivating my team. So it's not just kind of an issue with that affects, in my mind, how well we're able or going to be able to deliver the results that we need to. And I just find that so frustrating. So not just on a personal level, because I can deal with it, but it's more frustrating when it actually affects the entire running of the project, because it's affecting team.
There's some very interesting books and theories and things of the world about how the world of work is evolving. and how we've gone from kind of the cavemen times to being in a kind of very autocratic kind of environment. If you're interested in that area, have a look at, if you Google either self-organising teams or teal organisations, that's really insightful about how the world of work is changing and how organisations will work in the future. But there will always be people who will be slower to catch up on that, and ways of managing that will take a longer time to kind of flow through. But going back to what I said earlier, I think that COVID at the moment will accelerate all of that change. So understanding how you as an individual can make the best of whatever environment you're in becomes really key.
Thank you so much, Pip.
Let me just come in quickly on top of that, and then I think it's obviously difficult because it's a very particular situation, and you're in a very particular sector as well. And I think one of the challenges you've got is, even if you might offer to provide some useful and constructive upward feedback, feedback is not always received gratefully, and while you're offering it as a gift, it might not be received as a gift, and that requires courage on your part, and also to take a risk. So I think it's important that you are able to label the situation you're in. You are in a difficult situation which requires courage and may result in you choosing to take a risk. So it's really about how you want to handle that, whether there are other people in the organisation you can talk to get that support. And every one of us would handle that situation that you're in probably slightly differently. But there is an opportunity for you to at least ask your boss, would it be possible to have a conversation about how your style and your actions are impacting me and my team? Would it be possible for us to have that conversation? There's not much you can do other than go above his head if he says no, but possibly he'll say yes. And then who knows where that will take you.
Thank you. So I think I'm just conscious of time. So we have planned to go into breakout rooms now. Does anyone have any more questions before we do that?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi. So continuing on the theme of constant evolution and lifelong learning, I recently completed a business degree at Oxford, and my question is basically, I'm an senior academic and nonprofit administrator, and I'm interested in transitioning. I don't want to use the word pivot because it's overused lately, transitioning to the for-profit and financial services world. And, I'm a big believer that a lot is possible. So I'm just wondering, what are thoughts? I appreciate having the opportunity. Thank you, Hartford, for being able to get insights from this panel.
Great. Okay. So I don't know if anyone wants to have a quick comment on that now, or if we'll just, I think if you're in the sort of right breakout room, we might be able to get some insight there. So I just wanted to mention a couple of things just before we do go into the breakout rooms. First of all, to say thank you so much to our panelists. I can't tell you how much we appreciate your time and your expertise and your advice. It's hugely, hugely appreciated, particularly in the middle of what I'm sure is a busy day. So thank you so much. I also want to say thank you to Sarah. Nimali, you said very kindly thank you to me for organising. I have had nothing to do with this. I've just turned up and taken all the glory, but Sarah's done brilliant work on this. And to all our students and alumni here today, please do get in touch with Sarah and pass on your thoughts and feedback for what we can do next. We really want to make this something that works for you guys, and we have our own ideas and our own thoughts about what we might do, but please do send Sarah your feedback, because we'd be really interested to see what other events you'd be interested in attending and so forth. Final thing to say is that we are going to be creating a LinkedIn group for this new network. So please do watch out for that. Sarah will circulate information about how to join that, and this recording will be available after the fact. So if you have friends who were hoping to attend but weren't able for whatever reason, then please do share that with them. Sarah will let you know when it's available. So I think that's everything. Sarah, I'll now hand over to you to sort out the breakout rooms, and please bear with us, this always takes time. There is no quick and easy way to do it, so please bear with.
Great, yeah, I'll just echo what Fran said. Thank you so much all for joining. So the breakout rooms, I have put you all into breakout rooms. It's quite nice, it's quite small groups, so this should give you a really good chance to have a proper conversation with each of the speakers, more specifically to do with the careers that you're interested in. The last thing I would say is I really recommend getting each other's contact details, adding each other on LinkedIn, and I'd say not just, you know, students adding speakers, but also adding each other, adding students, because it is so important to grow your network, and you might as well start doing it now. So yeah, as Fran said, this might take a few minutes, but I'm going to click open rooms, and then you just have to accept go into your breakout room. We're also, that means that you won't be able to come back into the main discussion, but we'll close the call at around 1:30. I'll send a message around just before we close it, so you know that that's going to be happening. Okay, here we go.